Welcome everybody to another exciting edition of the Chase with Jace, and I am with Wilson Alexander, LSU football beat writer, the Advocate. Wilson does an absolutely fantastic job of covering the beat for LSU, and love being out there with him at the practices and seeing what the Tigers are looking like going to the 2024 season, year 3 of the Brian Kelly era, which is pretty crazy because I've been there since he's been here. So year 3 for me, year 3 for him. So it's pretty easy for me to figure that out with the math. But Wilson, thank you for coming on the show and talking some LSU football. First of all, just talk about another season. With the off season, we went through fall camp. Seems like it's going quicker and quicker each by passing season. But really, your expectations, has it really changed for you after seeing fall camp and seeing LSU through the fall? Has your opinion changed on this team since watching them? Has it changed now from when you saw them before?
Well, first, good to be with you, Jace. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, we did have some fun out there this preseason, even though we just sweated through every single piece of clothing that we own. While we were out there, my opinion on the defense changed. I feel a little bit better about this defense coming out of fall camp than I thought I would. Going in, certainly a lot of concerns at defensive tackle. Those have not been squashed. I still am worried about how they're going to be able to hold up in the interior, just because I need to see it. There wasn't anything that we saw in fall camp that made me think like, oh, wow, they're going to really exceed everybody's expectations about what they have at defensive tackle. I think Jacoby and Guillory had a solid, camp, and we've heard a lot of positive things about it. But, I'm reminded of last year when Brian Kelly said Savion Jones would have a monster year, and that just never really came to fruition. We got to see it with our own eyes once we get out there onto the field. But I do also feel a little bit better about the corners, specifically Ashton Stamps. I think is going to give them some solid play at that position. But it's, again, comes down to consistency across the back end. Are they able to make plays throughout the game every single week, all the way through the season, and not have too many breakdowns? Brian Kelly has said that he hasn't seen them in camp, whereas last year they obviously did a lot. And so that's a good thing. I think there's reasons to feel like the defense is going to get better. It's just a matter of actually going out and executing that, and also a matter of how much better. What does improvement for this defense actually look like? Because it's not going to be the top defense in the country, but how much better can it really get is going to be fascinating to watch.
And you've seen it, Wilson. You've seen it while we were out there about how aggressive really the defense has been, because we see it's been pretty consistent. When we talk about the 1-on-1s, the 7-on-7s, the offense gets the better of the defense. But when we're out there, 11-on-11s, I mean, the defense is really giving that offense really a run for their money. And you have to be encouraged from what you've seen from the defense based on how aggressive a lot of times Blake Baker is able to send safeties and linebackers and blitzes from all different directions. So knowing that, do you think this defense could be more of a high risk, high reward type of defense heading into this year?
Absolutely, especially because LSU might still have some deficiencies in terms of the personnel. There might still be some spots where it's not quite what you're used to from an LSU defense, and those guys just got to go out and kind of prove it in a few different areas. And because of that, if you were kind of coming in with this scheme, but you had the personnel that was like just draft picks across the board, you might not be taking as much of a risk all the time if you're able to just float two corners out there who can just play lockdown man coverage all the time. But if LSU's corners aren't able to do that, then there is a lot of risk involved with this defensive approach. And coaches all the time have to basically make that decision. How much risk are they willing to put in to reap the potential benefits, the potential rewards of playing an aggressive style? And that's something that where last year LSU was not willing to take those risks defensively. They were extremely cautious under Matt House. To a fault, really, I think. And that's not going to be the case this year. As you said, they are aggressive. They're sitting blitzes from all over the place. We've seen corner blitzes, different linebacker packages, this thing called the prowler front, where they really have all their pass rushers in on third down, stuff that LSU was not doing last year. It's just a major philosophical shift to Blake Baker from Matt House in that regard. Blake Baker wants his ideal. This is hard to obtain, but his ideal is a negative play essentially on 25% of plays for the offense. At Missouri, they had 19% in 2023, and then 20% or roughly in 2022. LSU's comparatively was at like 15.2% of negative plays on the total offensive plays. So, they're trying to get after that and create that disruption. But I think that's going to be a positive for this defense, but it very well could lead to some busted plays if they are not actually fundamentally sound enough and they're not playing consistent football.
Well, Wilson, it just seems like when we're out there in practice, one really theme comes to mind in my head over and over again, and it is the two things that for a normal football team that decides wins and losses, and that's time of possession, that's turnover ratio. But I feel like with this LSU football team, it's going to be even more important. I feel like for this LSU team to win the time of possession and the turnover battle this year. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. First of all, with the turnovers last year, LSU, because of Jaden Daniels, was so good at protecting the football. Jaden just did not turn the ball over the last 2 years, and it feels really for the last 2 years. For not, even though he wasn't pushing the ball downfield like everybody wanted and he needed to his first season as a starter, he was not throwing interceptions. Same thing a year ago. And now got a quarterback coming in who's known for taking more risks. Still has that gunslinger label on him. Even though Garrett Nussmeier doesn't like it, he's going to have to go out there and for a full season prove that he can make smart decisions with the football and keep it out of harm's way. And it is going to be important, I think, because in order to do that, because LSU might not be as ridiculously explosive as it was a year ago. I still think this is going to be a good offense, probably a top 15 offense, maybe even top 20. But they are, last year their explosive numbers in terms of 20-yard plays, 30-yard plays were incredible. Jaden was a walking 10-yard play every single, no matter if he was throwing the ball or running it. And that's going to be something that is, maybe different about this team. And so they are going to have to probably control the ball a little bit. Don't turn it over, really maximize those possessions that you do have. And control the clock a little bit to take some pressure off of your defense. I think that is kind of the recipe for this team because Brian Kelly has said already this preseason, he thinks that they're going to probably have to go and win a lot of close games. And is that something that you kind of have to do every year? Not necessarily if you're like a dominant program who's kind of like beating everybody by double digits fairly regularly. LSU is still kind of in this tier where like it's got to kind of scrap in some games, and there's going to probably be some really tight games. It's got to be able to win those one possession ball games. And one way to do that is controlling the clock and really being able to eat up, say you're up 5 in the fourth quarter with 5 minutes left, run the clock all the way down and don't give your opposing team a chance to win.
Yeah, and it seems like they are in that tier, right, of winning those close games, and that's what's going to be the factor, right? The turnover ratio, especially the time of possession. Last year was more of a track meet, scoring 2 or 3 plays and just win a high scoring shootout. And I feel like it's going to look a little different. We've seen the offense, and now they've been, doing walkthroughs in practice, so a lot of dump ball passes to running backs and tunnel screens and tosses. So you can tell with the O-line they got coming back that this is going to be more of a methodical offense. They'll drive the football downfield and multiple different plays. And we're joined by Wilson Alexander. Does a great job on the beat for the Advocate. So make sure to give him a follow if you haven't. WH Alexander _ So make sure to give him a follow on X. He does a great job. I even keep track of a lot of stuff that he posts. Make sure I'm on my game too. So Wilson, Garrett Nussmeier, right? I mean, that's going to be kind of a big topic of discussion with Garrett going to the season. And, as far as like him being able to lead this offense, and it seems like he's shown the big playability in practice and making a lot of those big throws. And he's been moving the ball downfield, but it seems like each day in practice, he's had maybe an interception or a bad throw here, or, has to burn a timeout there. We've seen that in practice. So what's been your evaluation of Garrett through fall practice?
I still don't think it's been like a bad fall camp for him. I don't think going into this season, if they lose 4 games or God forbid 5, I don't see them being 7-5, but there's a scenario in which they can go 8-4. And I still don't think that he would be like the only sole reason for that. Like, I don't think it's just like, oh, they're just going to have because of a problem at quarterback. Like, I think he's going to make a lot of good plays. But this is a guy who's a first-time starter, and there's probably going to be some ups and downs, and maybe some moments where his teammates got to rescue him. Like you said, there's been times when Brian Kelly has referenced some clock management that wasn't quite as crisp as it needed to be. Some moments where the defense has made plays on the ball, and when you're talking about this LSU defense from last year, I viewed it more as like the defense is making some strides, like when they're having those pass breakups. But it also could be a scenario in which maybe it says something about Garrett once we get into the season. I think we're just going to have to kind of wait and see, unfortunately. But that is, that has happened where, he's made some mistakes that he's going to has had to learn from. And there's probably going to be things here during the season where same kind of thing. He messes up at some point and he's got to learn from it. Even the bowl game, looking back for a second as an example, he leads that 98-yard drive. And we've all off season, just sort of focused on the fact that he led this drive, which is, I think you should do. But from a coach's perspective, talking to a source the other day, they pointed out that they remembered the fact that he missed what would have been a 98-yard touchdown on the first play of that drive, that he missed the throw. Now he came back and was able to then lead that drive, and that's what really I think should still be focused upon. But those are the sort of things where he's got to continue to clean up parts of his game because he's a first-time starter. He's been around for a while. He's maybe one of the more known backup quarterbacks in the country because of what he's done in the last two postseasons. But he's still got to go out there and prove it as much as anybody else that he's ready to be a first-time starter.
Well, one thing is for sure, and even though you lose 2 first-round draft picks out of receiver and Neighbors and Thomas, you have, it seems like, even more weapons. It just seems like, even though, because Brian Kelly said that they're probably about 7 deep at receiver, and we've seen the tight ends, the 3 tight ends in practice, and how good they're going to be, and the running back. So it just seems like there are multiple different ways. I'm sure Joe Sloan's really salivating at the mouth to figure out, okay, what kind of formations, what kind of personnel, because there's just so many options to get the football to, and there's only one football to go around. So what do you think about just the many weapons and how Joe Sloan, you think, can utilize that?
I've kind of cooled a little bit, frankly, on the idea like, they have all these weapons and they're just going to be, deeper at the skill position than they were a year ago. Because, I mean, gosh, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas were incredible. And Kyron Lacy was like, as a number 3 ended up by the second half of the season being like a really good number 3. And that's some nice depth, even though it's just like your first teamers. Yeah, maybe they're closer from 1 to 7 than they were last year in terms of talent level. But I'm worried that might not be the greatest thing ever. I still think LSU is going to be like fine. Like they aren't going to have like 2,000-yard receivers. They aren't going to have those stars on the outside necessarily. And they're going to have to lean on that ability to have talent that's maybe closer together in terms of talent level from 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7 at wide receiver. I hope that point makes sense to people. But I think where there is a strength that they maybe didn't have last year is at tight end. Because Mason Taylor now being a junior, I think he's going to be fantastic this year. I think when we look back on it, it's going to be probably the best season by a tight end in LSU history. I'm really high on him. I think that Cormorian Pimpton has come a long way and gives them the ability, if they're able to take advantage of it, quite a few mismatches. Trey'Dez Green is probably going to get a good bit of playing time this year, especially as just a receiver because he's so imposing. Even though he's probably going to have to clean up parts of his game, I think they can find a way to use him right away. Whereas with Pimpton last year, they just weren't able, there was nice things there, but they weren't able to find a way to use him. He wasn't ready yet. Seems like Trey'Dez might be ready to be used in some ways as a pass catcher. So yeah, there are a lot of weapons. There are. It's just that they don't have that like first round talent that's obvious and apparent in preseason camp. Lacey's been really good this offseason, but like last year, you're looking at Malik Neighbors at camp, like, oh my goodness, he's going to be unstoppable. They don't have that necessarily this year. They do have depth, but it's just not that top level depth, top level talent that I think that they had a year ago.
Sure. And like you said earlier, is the offensive line and being able to lean on that offensive line. And obviously you have 2 first-round draft picks projected right now, really protecting your quarterback on the left tackle and right tackle. And you get 2 veteran starters inside at guard. But center, I mean, it's been a little choppy at some moments this fall camp at the center position. So where are you at with the center position right now on the O-line?
Yeah, it has been. There was some moments where DJ Chester didn't quite look as crisp, and obviously Garrett Dellinger got some looks there. It still feels like a point though. Like we saw DJ Chester play well when he came in the Fire as a freshman. Even though it was a small sample size, like I'm still not. Even though we saw like some inconsistency a little bit in camp, it wasn't so much that I'm like worried about him like too much. He's got such great size. Seems to communicate really well. Just a sharp guy. Having talked to him back in the spring, and when you can't cover up the center position. He's the guy who makes the calls, guy who makes the snaps, but he's at least able to, in terms of like blocking, he's going to be, in on a lot of combo blocks and not just necessarily by himself on an island as a first-time starter. And I think that over the course of the year, while there could be some hiccups, but I think that he'll be a solid, piece of that offensive line, which is so talented. LSU, I think, is going to be in a lot of games this year and be competitive with everybody on its schedule because of that offensive line in particular. That is the obvious strength of the team for me.
And yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been talking about that O line, and we have 4 veterans that have been together for years, year 3 going into it, and you felt pretty good going into this year 2 years ago when those 2 tackles out there starting as freshmen and excelling as freshmen. So moving to the defensive side, even though you feel really great about the offensive line, even though the edges you have some pieces to work with there, at least on the edges with Savion Jones, Braden Swinson, and guys like that, Deshaun Womack. But the interior, I think Brian Kelly said maybe 5 guys he's comfortable with at least to rotate. And going to the season, I know that's less than ideal, especially when it's in the trenches and there's injuries that happen, a lot of stuff that happens there. So do you think LSU can, do you think Blake Baker can, hide that a little bit, their deficiencies a little bit, knowing that a lot of teams might have to run right straight at the interior defensive line?
You can hide it in certain situations. Like you can hide it on 3rd down and long by just putting in a bunch of pass rushers. You can hide it by, being aggressive schematically, bringing your linebackers downhill. This is a linebacker heavy scheme in terms of just like the importance that is on them to make plays. Jacoby and Guillory said at one point this preseason, those linebackers are coming down. They've got it. They're supposed to explode through the gaps and make plays in the backfield. And so you can hide it to some degree if it's a deficiency, but in the SEC, you cannot get away with it for a 12 game season, not in your biggest games. And we've seen that in the past with LSU where they maybe, I think, 2017 Alabama comes to mind, whereas like LSU was not as good up front as Alabama was back in those days. And that was a big reason why they lost so many years in a row. And it wasn't really until they kind of caught up that, there was a lot of reasons for that 2019 team, but anyway, we digress. So they can cover it up to some extent if it is a problem, but they're not going to be able to get away with it fully, especially against, I think, like Ole Miss and Alabama, who are still really good up front. And those are the games that might end up kind of deciding LSU season. So they're going to have to be ready in those moments. They're excited about, I think, Guillory and what he can do this year as a first-time starter. Paez, and the rest of the crew will kind of just have to see because – being able to rotate 5 or 6 deep would be better than what LSU has done in terms of its depth the last 2 seasons at defensive tackle.
Yeah.
But okay, again, it sort of reminds me of a receiver. It's like, are you rotating 5 or 6 guys because none of them are that much better than the other? Or are you rotating 5 or 6 guys because you feel like they can all play? We'll have to kind of see that when we get into the games.
Well, yeah, we're going to find that out pretty quickly starting this Sunday against USC. A lot of these questions are going to be answered. And you talk about the linebackers, such a linebacker-heavy scheme. And, Harold Perkins was awarded number 7 jersey, and deservingly so for what he's been able to do, especially breaking out as a freshman and doing what he's been able to do. But this linebacking core, I had an interesting conversation with Matt Moscona, and he said that he's really not there yet on that linebacking core right now. But there's been a lot of really big plays by Harold Perkins and a lot of conversations about him moving inside at middle linebacker. And, we've seen some really good moments of him really dominating in fall camp, again, in the backfield, making a lot of TFL. So Blake Baker said he has 4 capable starters in there. And, LSU runs a 4-2-5 base defense. So where you're at right now with that group, knowing it's such a heavy linebacker scheme. And since Blake Baker is a former linebacker guy himself.
I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid on the
Yeah.
linebackers. I don't
Me
feel it.
too.
I'm all in on them. I guess the opposite of Matt. I
Yeah.
feel like they're going to be a really good group. Greg Penn's just steady,
Mhm.
reliable tackler, get everybody lined up properly, a veteran presence to have in the middle of the defense who might not be, a top like 50 draft prospect kind of player, but someone who has been in the fires in the SEC for now going into his, third straight year as a starter. That's a great thing to have there.
Mhm.
Harold Perkins, I know that we need to like believe it, like see it to
Mhm.
believe it
Right. Right.
with him at inside linebacker. But like maybe it's just because I'm like want to see it. I feel like that we're going to. I've seen him so disruptive in the preseason in a way that
Yeah.
we didn't notice last year. Just around the ball a ton. Hearing what Brian Kelly said recently about how
Oh yeah.
Harold is elevating the game of everybody around him for the first time in his career is a really encouraging statement. And he's somebody who's just so talented. I can't see another year of him not being as impactful as somebody with his athleticism should be. And I feel like Blake Laker's going to be able to get a lot out of him. As the one thing is going to really be interesting, I think, to see is how does he do holding up against the run?
Mhm.
Can he shed blocks? Or can they find a way to, or can they just send him downhill so fast that nobody can catch him? I don't know. And then with the Weeks brothers, especially Witt,
Mhm.
has so much promise. He's so fast and athletic and did such great things as a freshman that I think he's going to be even better as a sophomore. And his brother's just kind of, an experienced guy who's been around for a while and, can be part of the rotation. So I feel I'm really high on this linebacker core personally.
Yeah, yeah, and I know Harold Perkins joked with us when he was talking to us in the media. I know you wrote a piece about it, about going to Dorothy's and of course, eating up and eating that big meal. So that I don't
I'm
know how
still
he
full
does it.
from
I
that
don't know how
one.
he keeps that weight off, but
I'm
that's a
still
mystery
full
to
from
me.
that one, man.
Well, lastly, the secondary, Wilson will address that before we talk a little bit about USC. But the secondary, I'm a little bit surprised knowing that I thought we'd be seeing a little bit more moving around for the most part. But really, from what we've seen out there, they really kept the same guys in the secondary. Now, I think the biggest question I have is they're going to definitely move around. When Sage Ryan, I mean, he was playing safety in the spring, and they moved him at corner in the fall. And I think a lot of it has to do with Zy Alexander and when he can get fully healthy. But how do you picture if you're in LSU shoes right now? Do you put Sage Ryan out there at cornerback to start and put Jordan Allen at safety, or do you put Sage Ryan at safety and give a guy like J.K. Johnson or P.J. Wendell a shot at corner? I think that's basically my biggest question going to the USC matchup.
I just assume that we'll see what we have all of fall camp. Think
Hmm.
back to last year for a second. They were rotating corners kind of in and out, and then right near the end of camp, like a week or so, week and a half out from the first game, was when Sage Ryan moved over to corner.
Hmm.
And at the time, it suddenly became clear, like, oh, they don't trust anybody else. Like they feel like they got to do it, and it seems like they're back in that kind of position. Like I'm not sure if they think anybody else is ready to play consistently at corner, um, you know, for an entire game. And maybe Zai is the person who they're waiting on, or maybe it's somebody else that they're waiting on one of those other guys to step up. I'm not sure. And maybe if they are waiting on that, and then like you said, you kind of move Sage back to safety
Hmm.
or something like that. I think right now they see Sage as the guy who is the most just steady and consistent,
Hmm.
even though he might not make a bunch of like flash plays at corner.
Hmm.
He is probably someone who, Brian Kelly has said in the past they view him as just a solid tackler and someone who can probably, they think anyway, get them off the field. So that's the position though where I'm most interested to see what happens to, like, over the course of the season. Does that stay that way all year? Because I would have thought at some point in camp they would have mixed it up, and they never did. So
Yeah.
because we've seen the same defensive formation every time we were at practice, I figure it'll be Ashton Stamps and Sage Ryan at corner, Major Burns at the
Hmm.
star, Jordan Allen and Jardin Gilbert at safety.
Yeah.
And until that changes, I feel like that's what we have to expect to see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Was a little surprised though they kind of kept the secondary for the most part. I know when they went to nickel, they had Jair Brown in there, him getting some reps too in the starting lineup. So yeah, it's been interesting how they've been working that out. Special teams wise, really a bright spot the last couple of years, and what was a position group that really struggled. Special teams, you lose him, Jay Bramlett. He's always been pretty solid, even though you didn't really see much of him last year for obvious reasons. But the punting situation's pretty interesting because Brian Kelly, he talked about it in spring that he wasn't really satisfied with the consistency at the punter position. When you fast forward, they get a guy out of the portal and Blake Oschendorf from Louisiana Tech, and now he's battling for the punting job. And Brian Kelly told us in the media that you won't be surprised to see both of them out there. I believe you asked them a question on Monday about the special teams. So it's going to be curious. I'm very curious how they're going to be working that. If it's going to be more of a situational thing with each punter, or if we're going to see one punter out there on Sunday.
I think if I were to list out concerns about this team, punter would probably be like number 3.
Yeah.
Going into the season, we did not see consistent punting in fall camp, and I think most people kind of overlook it, like, special teams will figure it out, but everybody still probably feels those scars a little bit from 2022 with how much special teams burned them, and I'm worried that the punting in particular could burn them in some way at some point this season. If just putting the defense in a bad spot because of an errant punt gives the opposing team good field position, something like that. We've seen that in the preseason here, where there's been times when Blake Oschendorf and Peyton Todd have just like shanked kicks, and or just like really wobbly ones that don't have good hang time. And until I'm going to keep worrying about it until I see them be consistent. Both of them, and I think Oschendorf in particular, more often this camp, like they've got some powerful legs. It's just getting into it every single kick is going to be really important. The rest of the special teams, we weren't ever able to get like a sense of them in preseason camp. This is kind of the only thing that we could tell. Looks like it'll be interesting to see if Xavier Thomas can make a difference in the return game. But yeah, punting was really the one thing where we could see it and see clearly like they might have an issue here that could affect them. And we'll learn right away because Zachariah Branch is one of the best returners in the country. He was awesome last year as a freshman at USC, so fast. And they're going to have to make sure that they don't give him chances to return punts in this game. Otherwise, it could end up being a bit of a swing factor.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't really seen much of the kick. We haven't really taught much of kicking this fall camp just because we haven't really seen it. But you also assume that Damian Ramos is just going to continue to be the starter. But we haven't really seen really much. We maybe seen 2 or 3 kicks really through fall camp, if that. But it's going to be interesting to see. And no, it's really burned LSU the last couple of years, especially early in the season. So we can make that transition, Wilson, to USC. And, since it's been 2019 since LSU won a national championship that they've won a season opener. And it's hard to believe that's been the case. But going against USC, and I asked Brian Kelly about the 18 jersey and when that was going to come up. And, of course, the next day was when they released number 18 and number 7. And you have 2 of those for both sides of the football, which is really a good sign, knowing the veteran leadership. And I know that was talked about on Monday's press conference with Brian Kelly, with a lot of guys that had those scars, right, of losing those season openers. And now they're in their 3rd, 4th year of this program. So do you think that gives them any of a advantage over USC, knowing what they've been through the last couple of years in season openers?
Jace, I'm sorry, can we pause?
Yeah.
Is that possible? We talked to Will Campbell right near the beginning of preseason camp, and the subject of the fact that they had not won a season opener in his career, but also since 2019 came up. And there was this determined look on his face, and he said, that's not going to happen again. And it was pretty close to like guaranteeing a win kind of talk, which is dangerous. Right. But that's just the mindset that this team has. They do not want that taste in their mouth coming out of season opener again, because last 2 years, they lose those games to Florida State, and which I really just refer to those because that's the Brian Kelly era. And it just felt like this big letdown because you both of them were sloppy. LSU didn't play well out of the gate at all. And it was like, wow, they have all this stuff to fix over the course of the season. and it just kind of sucked the air out of the room a little bit going into the rest of the year both times. And while they were able to end up having, especially I think in 2022, like good years, I mean, they won the SEC West,
Mm-hmm.
it set the season off on such a bad tone to lose
Mm-hmm.
those big
Right.
games. And USC is not the caliber of opponent that Florida State was last year,
Mm-hmm.
but it is still a brand name. You're the only show in the country happening Sunday night, in Las Vegas, big stage. They need to come out there and assert themselves a little bit, set the tone, for the rest of the year. They can still, especially in the 12-team playoff era, accomplish what you want to this season after losing the first game. But LSU is going to have some tough SEC opponents. They're fortunate that most of those difficult games are at home, but they still, if you were to lose this game, have a very small margin for error. You could really only lose probably one more time the rest of the year if you want to make a 12-team playoff, and that's a tall task. So they just need to come out here. They need to win that, and then rattle off a few more wins and be undefeated, go into Ole Miss, and then the season really starts to pick up steam. But you're going to feel much more uneasy about this team if they go and lay another egg in the season opener. And I think it would also put a little bit of pressure on Brian Kelly because it would be a big game that they didn't play well in if they were to lose this one.
Right, right. And like you said, the college football playoff, that's definitely an interesting storyline this year, just expand playoff, and that there is a little bit more room for error this year because of that. But still, with the SEC and how tough it really is, you definitely need to start off with a win and, maybe get yourself in position, like you said, to go undefeated heading into Ole Miss. So if you look at both these programs, Wilson, you really take the jerseys off both of them and you say this is program A, program B, with LSU and USC, you probably can't tell the difference. I mean, both were replacing, Heisman Trophy quarterbacks and went number one, number two. Obviously, defenses held them back with that play on that side of the ball last couple of years from really being a college football playoff contender. But this year, and then both replacing quarterbacks, new quarterbacks coming in, defense, a lot of question marks coming to the season. So knowing that, what do you think is going to be the key in this game for either LSU or USC to get on top of this one?
Well, there's a lot of things that you could point to, certainly, but I'll go with this. What I think differentiates LSU in this game is the offensive line that we talked about earlier. The fact that you look at the defenses, and they both were abysmal last year. USC was somehow worse defensively, statistically,
I can't
than
imagine
LSU was. They ranked 121st in the country in points allowed per game. LSU was 81st. USC gave up like 34.6 points per game. They were awful, and very similar to LSU, whole new staff. And so if you look at those things, this game is really going to tell us who actually improved defensively during the season. But because we don't know that going into the game, because it's the opener, there's so much unknown about that okay, those still look like equally porous units on paper, right? And then you look at the offenses, like you said, quarterbacks, that's kind of a wash. It's very similar scenarios as first-time starters. Receivers and skill players, both of them have strengths at those and good players outside. Where I think the differentiator occurs is on the offensive line. I think LSU is going to be able to lean on that to be able to win this game.
And I feel, and I'm with you, Wilson. I feel like the biggest advantage LSU has is the offensive line. If they're able to play that ground control, time of possession, that's really another defense really to have when you're playing keep away from USC. I feel like that's LSU's biggest advantage. But do you think USC's biggest advantage could be the return game, knowing LSU's situation at punter and with a dynamic player in Zachariah Drake as well, returning those punts?
Yeah, it certainly could be. That is somewhere where USC looks like it has that advantage on paper. Branch was, amazing last year. I think he had like over 700 combined yards returning punts and kickoffs. And so if LSU is having trouble keeping the ball away from him, then he can really shape field position. And that could end up having an influence on the game for sure if he's able to do that.
That's right, Zachariah Branch as well. The punt returner. I know he's made a lot of big plays for USC, and then they've actually blocked a couple of punts too, and that could be a really big change when you saw how special teams played the difference in that. So, Wilson, I'm sure you're going to be reporting about this and having this on the Advocate anyway, but have you really thought of a final score prediction or ever really thought about, I know y'all got some game previews going on for the Advocate, but have you really thought about how this game you think could could swing?
I got 35-30 LSU.
35-30
I think they
LSU.
get it done. I think it's high scoring because, the defense is, who knows? There could be a scenario which is a little bit more low scoring than that because the offense is season opener. Maybe things come out kind of clunky. But I still think LSU ends up winning by, probably less than a touchdown. So 35-30 is my prediction.
Okay, yeah, for sure. And one thing we didn't really get a chance to talk about is, for the most part, LSU, knock on wood, they've been pretty healthy going into this game week, and we've seen a lot of years previous where there's been suspensions, a lot of injuries. We've seen that happen the last couple of years, but right now, Chris Hill, I believe, is the only questionable player right now on the injury list. And it was like Kyle Parker. I mean, Brian Kelly said Kyle Parker could be that guy that steps up as that third guy. So any key guys that you have your eye on that could be the X factor for Sunday's game?
On the LSU side in particular, for me, Savion Jones stands out. We've seen some things from him in preseason camp that are much more encouraging than the way he played last year. Feels like he said himself, and you can see it in the reps that he has, particularly against Emory Jones in one-on-one drills. Looks much more technically sound as a pass rusher. He says that he feels more comfortable at the weight that he's playing at. That he added 30 pounds last offseason, didn't feel comfortable at it for a while during the year. Now he says he feels that he does. And if LSU is able to generate pressure with him off the edges, then that makes his defense a lot better. And so I'm going to have my eye on him early in this game to see if he's able to make a difference. And I think that he could end up being an X factor in this game and also just throughout the season if he's able to actually live up to the physical potential that he has.
Yeah, you're not going to face a lot of tackles like you are every day in practice, like Emory and Will Campbell. And I've paid attention a little bit in practice, and I believe I've seen Will lose one rep, basically what I've seen, and that was to Savion Jones. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, he's had his best fall camp of his career and see how he can continue to improve on that and maybe have his best season as a Tiger. So, Wilson, appreciate you for coming on the show and talking some LSU football. I'm sure every now and then we'll catch together and talk about the season and everything and how the Tigers are really doing. But yeah, promote what's going on in the Advocate. I know you posted a really cool story about Garrett Nussmeier. I was able to read a little bit of it and just how some of the mental hurdles he really had to overcome to get where he's at LSU. But talk about some of the content, the Garrett Nussmeier story, and some of the content that's going in the Advocate.
We've got a lot coming out all week in terms of just previews about this team and getting everybody ready for the game and in the season ahead. But the Garrett Nussmeier story is kind of the biggest one, I suppose. It'll be in the newspaper on Sunday if you want to read it there. I'm sure our designer's going to have a great layout for that, and it's already up online. I went over to Lake Charles and was with his family for a day. Garrett has moved 12 times in his life. He's lived in 8 different states and Canada. But Lake Charles for him was the one constant that he had because his mom's family is from there. Good Friday for them is 50 people boiling 350 to 400 pounds of crawfish out in Lacassee. His roots run really deep there. He's had families lived in the Cameron area since the 1880s. And so he did go through some difficult mental stuff during the 2022 season when, he was somebody who came in, thought he was going to be able to play much sooner in his career than he did. And he put a lot of pressure on himself early in that 22 season, thinking he could have a chance to be the starter. And Jaden was picked to be the starter. And he said he was in a really dark place. He threw those interceptions in the Southern game, and he had tears in his eyes. He said falling out afterward because he had just gotten so frustrated and he had lost himself. Fast forward to the 2020, he was able to sort of regain the right perspective they needed to have after a conversation with Drew Brees. But you fast forward a couple of months to the SEC championship game, he was thinking about whether or not he needed to transfer. He said that he felt that temptation because he wanted to play. This is a competitive guy. He wanted to be on the field. And he was able, though, to realize that he wanted to stay at LSU. And a lot of that goes back to the roots that he had in Louisiana already. He said how, he had prayed and sort of been pointed in that direction during recruiting. And if he'd already gotten an answer then, why would the answer be different now? And he felt like this was the place for him. He understood after conversations with coaches, he was in their long-term plans. And there was a moment in the SEC championship game right before he went in, Colin Baton Rouge played over the loudspeakers, and he realized this is where I want to be. I want to be playing in these games for this school. And so he stayed. And now it's finally his chance to show what he can do.
Yeah, it seems
so that's
like
a kind of a summary of that story, but I encourage everybody to go read it because it gets into a lot more detail about just why that place means so much to him.
absolutely. Go check it out and make sure check out Wilson's stuff on the Advocate. He does a great job, and that's a great read as well. Definitely highly encourage you to go and do that if you haven't got the chance to. And yeah, it was pretty cool that Garrett Nussmeier seems like that really light switch turned on in that SEC championship game when he got in for Jayden Daniels and made a lot of really good throws against a really good Georgia defense in that SEC championship game. And it seemed like it's really turned around for him. Yeah, appreciate it, Wilson. Any final thoughts? Just upcoming Sunday for a game day. Game week is finally here for LSU and USC. They're going to get the solo show. Nothing else going on Sunday night. They got the show to themselves. So, any final thoughts about this Sunday? We got some football, Wilson. College football's back.
No, I'm just excited for the season ahead. It felt great watching that Georgia Tech Florida State game, best week 0 that I can ever remember seeing.
Oh, yeah.
Usually I kind of overlook it, but that was fantastic television and just got me so pumped for the season ahead. I think it's going to be chaotic with the first team in time in a 12-team playoff and an expanded SEC, but it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I'm more like I'm just like giddy about this season.
Yeah.
I think even more so than I have in the last couple of years for whatever reason. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun going throughout the year.
Absolutely, Wilson. Appreciate you again. I'm sure we'll catch up throughout the season every once in a while, maybe like a mid-season update or a late season update on how the Tigers are doing. What's your thoughts on that? But if you haven't got a chance, make sure to follow Wilson Alexander at WHAlexander_, and keep up with him and all his great content throughout the season. And also, we'll have a lot of coverage on our end too for GridironFootballUSA.com. Been posting LSU practice reports every day. And then we'll also have obviously game recaps and some cool stuff on our end as well. So make sure to check us out at GridironFootballUSA.com. But for Wilson Alexander, I'm Jace Luzerne. This has been another great edition of Chase with Jace, and we'll catch up with y'all next week and see how the Tigers fared in the season opener against the USC Trojans.